The number I keep coming back to is 47. 47 minutes. That's how long the ceremony venue held the doors closed while we waited for him. 47 minutes of guests sitting in white folding chairs, glancing at their programs, checking their phones, murmuring things I could not hear from the bridal suite at the end of the hall. 47 minutes while my father sat in a restaurant 3 miles away, eating a meal he had ordered deliberately, slowly, at a table he had booked 2 weeks in advance, because he wanted me to know it was a choice, not a conflict. He did not want to walk me down the aisle. He said so to my face 2 days before the wedding. But the truth is, he didn't want to attend at all. He just didn't have the decency to say that part out loud. What this story is really about is a property deed, a promissory note, and a man who believed that love was something he could extend or revoke like a line of credit. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts, and family learns that dignity has a paper trail. If you believe that what gets documented gets remembered, and that silence is not the same as forgiveness, subscribe and stay with me. I am a paralegal. I have been one for 11 years, and before that I spent 4 years watching attorneys turn human relationships into interrogatories and exhibit lists. What that work teaches you, what it drills into you until it becomes reflex, is that the most dangerous thing a person can do is assume a document says something it does not actually say. People do it constantly. They sign things without reading them. They inherit things without verifying them. They spend money they believe belongs to them based on conversations that happened over dinner, in dens at holidays, conversations that were never recorded, never notarized, never filed with the county clerk's office. I am very careful about documents. It is the thing my grandmother used to tease me about. She would say, "Miriam, you would ask God for his paperwork." And I would say, "Grandma, I just want to make sure the property description is accurate." She thought this was the funniest thing about me. She also, as it turns out, thought it was the most useful. My grandmother's name was Cecile. She was 79 years old when I got engaged to David, and she sat in her armchair with both of her small hands wrapped around a coffee mug and said, "He has kind eyes. A man with kind eyes will not lie to you in the dark." She had been married for 51 years to a man who, by all accounts, had kind eyes and kept his word. David does have kind eyes. He also has a laugh that starts in his chest and moves outward until the whole room reorganizes itself around it. He is a high school history teacher. He is the person who remembered my grandmother's birthday when I forgot it because I was buried in a deposition. He brought her grocery store carnations in a cellophane sleeve and she cried and told him he was a good man. And he sat with her for 2 hours talking about things that mattered. He is black. I am white. And in the geography of my family, which is to say, in the geography of my father's household, this was not a detail. It was, according to my father, a verdict. My father's name is Gerald. He has been the kind of man who uses the phrase, "That's just how it is," the way other people use punctuation, at the end of every sentence that required him to examine himself and decline the invitation. He worked 40 years in municipal services. He has a flag on his porch. He sends Christmas cards with a photo of himself and his second wife Lorraine on them every year without fail. He also loaned me $60,000 in 2017 to help with the down payment on my condo. He presented this loan at the kitchen table with Lorraine present with what I understood to be enormous generosity. He did not give me a promissory note. He did not specify terms. He did not charge interest. He told me, "We'll figure it out when the time comes." I was 31 years old and I was grateful and I wrote him a thank you card that I spent 45 minutes composing. I should have asked for the paperwork. He called me on a Tuesday. It was 14 days before the wedding. I was at my kitchen table with a seating chart and a highlighter and David was in the other room grading papers on a stack of rubrics. My father said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm not sure I can stand up there, in front of everyone, with him." I said, "With David." He said, "You know what I mean, Miriam." I set down the highlighter. I placed both palms flat on the table. This is something I do when I am in a deposition and someone says something I need to remember exactly word for word. He said, "It's not what I wanted for you. I have a right to feel that." I said, "You have a right to feel anything you want, Dad. But walking me down the aisle is an action. That's different from a feeling." He said, "I think it would be better for everyone if I just wasn't there." I asked him one question. I said, "Does Grandma Cecile know you're telling me this?" He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. Then he said, "This isn't about your grandmother." He hung up. I sat at that table for a long time. David came out of the other room eventually, still holding a red pen, and he looked at my face and set the pen down and did not say anything, because he knows when I am working through something and need quiet more than I need words. After a while I picked up my phone. I opened my notes app. I typed the date, the time, and the exact words I could remember from the call, not my interpretation of them, the words themselves. Quotation marks. Timestamp. The way I would note anything I might need to produce later. I did not cry. I made tea. I sat with the seating chart and I moved my father's place card to a table that no longer existed. He did not come to the wedding. He went to a restaurant. I know this because Lorraine texted my cousin B at 11:42 a.m. on the morning of my ceremony to say that they had found a lovely place nearby, and the brunch menu looked wonderful. My cousin B forwarded me that text at 11:43 a.m. I screenshotted it at 11:43 a.m. I named the file by date and time the way I name everything. The doors opened 47 minutes late. I walked myself down the aisle. My grandmother Cecile was in the third row, and she was wearing the blue dress she had bought specifically for that day, and when she saw me, she put both of her small hands over her mouth. David was at the altar, and his eyes were bright with something that had nothing to do with grief. We were married at 12:31 p.m. I have the certificate. Grandma Cecile died 8 months later. It was February, and it was the kind of cold that makes the whole world feel like it has thinned down to something skeletal. She went quietly in her own bed, which was what she had always asked for. David and I were there. My father was not, though he knew she was failing. I had texted him twice in the final 2 weeks, the way you do when you want to be able to say you told someone even knowing they will not come. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from an attorney named Philip Osei, who had a quiet, measured voice and an office downtown that smelled faintly of cedar. He told me he was the executor of my grandmother's estate. I had not known she had an estate in the formal sense. I had known she had a house, the same house she had lived in for 43 years, the house where I spent every summer until I was 16, the house with the yellow kitchen and the garden that grew more tomatoes than one woman could ever eat. I had not known that 4 years ago, quietly, without mentioning it to anyone, she had transferred that property into a revocable living trust. I sat across from Mr. Osei and he slid a document across the table. It was the trust. It was 11 pages. I read all 11 pages. He waited because he seemed to understand that I would read all 11 pages. My grandmother had named me the sole beneficiary of her estate. The house. The contents of the house. A savings account I had not known existed, which held $74,200. And a second document which Mr. Osei produced after I had read the trust, which was a piece of paper I recognized immediately because I work with instruments like it regularly. It was a promissory note, dated 2017, for $60,000, signed by Gerald Arthur Holt, my father's name. My grandmother had loaned my father the money he loaned me, and he had signed a promissory note to her, one I had never been told about, one that specified repayment terms, one that charged simple interest at 3% per annum, one that had a maturity date of December 31, 2024, one that had a clause in paragraph 7, which stated that in the event of the lender's death prior to full repayment, the outstanding balance and all accrued interest would pass to the lender's designated estate and be collectible by the estate's executor or beneficiary. I read that paragraph twice. Then I read it a third time. The outstanding balance as of the date of my grandmother's death was $60,000. My father had not repaid $1. I also received, in an envelope inside a larger envelope, a single handwritten letter. 3 paragraphs in my grandmother's careful, slightly slanted cursive. The first paragraph said she was sorry she could not be there to see what came next, but that she had always believed I would know what to do with it. The second paragraph said, Gerald has always confused silence with consent. I have watched you absorb the cost of that confusion your entire life. This note was my way of keeping a record. I wanted someone to know the price of what he took. The third paragraph contained one sentence that I have since read perhaps 200 times. It said, You never owed him your joy, and now the ledger is corrected. I folded that letter back into its envelope. I put the envelope in my bag. I drove home and I sat in the parking garage of my building for 20 minutes before going inside. If you've ever watched a person who couldn't manage 47 minutes at a ceremony suddenly have opinions about money that has never once been in their hands, you already know where this goes. Stay with me. My father called me 6 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. He had heard about the trust, I do not know through which family channel, but in families like mine information moves like water, finding the lowest path whether you want it to or not. He said he wanted to come by. He said he thought we should talk about Grandma Cecile's estate. He said, There may have been some confusion about how things were left. I said, I don't think there was confusion, Dad. Trusts are fairly explicit instruments. He said, Well, I want to talk about the house. It should stay in the family. I said, It is in the family. He asked if he could come by Saturday. I said I had planned Saturday. He asked about Sunday. I said I'd think about it. I did not call him back. Instead, I called Mr. Osei and told him to send the letters. He sent 3. One was a formal notice to my father that the promissory note had passed to me as beneficiary of the estate, and that I was now the legal holder of the instrument. One was a letter of inquiry regarding the outstanding balance, requesting documentation of any payments made. One was a letter to my father's attorney, if he had one, notifying them of the same. My father did not have an attorney. He called me instead. He said, What is this? I said, It's a promissory note, Dad. You signed it. He said, That was between me and your grandmother. I said, And now it's between you and me. He said, She wouldn't have wanted this. And here is where the professional in me stepped forward quietly, the way it always does. I said, She wrote it down, Dad. In paragraph 2 of her letter to me, she used the phrase, I wanted someone to know the price. That's not ambiguous. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I don't have $60,000. I said, I know. Then I said, There's something I'd like to do actually. I'd like to bring this to the family. All of it. I think everyone should understand the full picture before anyone makes any assumptions about what happens next. My Aunt Renata, my father's sister, had been planning a gathering at her house the following month. A cousin's graduation party. My father would be there. Most of the family would be there. I called Renata and asked if I could come. She said of course. She sounded surprised that I would want to. I prepared a folder. The folder was not theatrical. It was a standard manila legal folder, the kind I use at work. Inside it were the following documents tabbed: the trust, the promissory note, the letter of inquiry my attorney had sent, the text from Lorraine to my cousin B time-stamped 11:42 a.m. on the morning of my wedding, and a single photograph. The photograph was from my wedding. It was taken by a guest in the 3rd row, and it had been posted to social media the afternoon of the ceremony and tagged to my profile. In it, you can see my grandmother Cecile in her blue dress, both hands over her mouth, eyes bright with something that is not grief. Behind her, to the left, you can see an empty seat with a name card still tucked into the folded program on the chair. The name on the card, if you look closely enough, reads Gerald. I had printed it at full size. I had placed it at the back of the folder. I drove to Renata's house on a Saturday in April. It was warm. There were balloons on the mailbox. Inside, the living room was full: my aunt, 3 cousins, 2 cousins' spouses, my cousin B, and my father, who was sitting in the armchair near the window with a glass of iced tea and the look of a man who had been waiting for me. He made his move within 40 minutes of my arrival. He waited until the party had settled, until the graduation cake had been cut, until the plastic cups had been refilled, until the noise of the room had dropped to the comfortable hum of a family that believes it is alone with itself. Then he stood up. He said he wanted to say something about his mother's estate. He said there had been some documents that were being handled by attorneys, which he said the way people say the phrase when they want it to sound like bureaucratic interference rather than legal consequence. He said his mother had been confused in her final years, and I watched my Aunt Renata's face go very still at that, because Renata had been present for every one of my grandmother's final years and knew exactly how clear-eyed that woman had been until the morning she died. He said he believed the family should talk about the house, because it was a family home, because it had history, because Miriam would understand that some things are bigger than paperwork. He looked at me when he said that last part. The room looked at me. I said, "Could I have a moment?" There was a small silence. He nodded, the way you nod at someone you think is about to concede. I opened the folder. I said, "I want to make sure everyone is working from the same information." I started with the trust. I did not summarize it. I read the relevant clauses aloud: the beneficiary designation, the property description, the date it was executed. Then I said, "Grandma Cecile filed this 4 years ago." She was not confused. She had legal counsel. There is a signature and a notary seal on page 11. I moved to the promissory note. I held it up. I said, "This is a promissory note for $60,000, signed by my father in 2017. It was a loan from my grandmother to him, which he used in full to loan money to me for my down payment. He told me it was his money. He did not tell me it was his mother's. He did not tell me there was a note. He has not made a single payment on this instrument in 7 years." My father said, "Miriam, this is not the place." I said, "You chose the place, Dad. You stood up in it." He said, "I was going to pay her back." I was. I said, "There's a maturity date in paragraph 4. December 31st, 2024. That date has passed." My cousin B was very quiet. My Aunt Renata had put down her cup. My father's voice changed register. He said, "You're going to embarrass yourself doing this." I said, "I'm a paralegal, Dad. I work in embarrassing rooms for a living. This one is very nice by comparison." He said louder, "You're doing this because of the wedding. This is spite." I said, "I'm doing this because I am the holder of a legal instrument, and you have not honored it." He said, "Your grandmother never intended for you to use that note against me. She loved me." I said, "She did love you." I reached for the letter. I said, "She also wrote this." I read one line. Just one. I said, "You never owed him your joy, and now the ledger is corrected." The room was entirely still. I reached for the photograph. I placed it on the coffee table in the center of the room, face up, without comment. My grandmother in her blue dress, both hands over her mouth. The empty chair behind her. The name card. My Aunt Renata looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she looked at my father. She did not say anything, but what moved across her face was not something I needed to interpret. My cousin B, who is 24 and has always been the person in our family who says the thing no one else will, said quietly, "Uncle Gerald, you didn't go." He said, "It's complicated." She said. She was in the 3rd row. He did not answer that. I closed the folder. I stood up. I said, "I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I'm here because for 35 years I have absorbed the cost of how this family handles its discomfort, and I've decided I'm done paying that bill." Then I said the thing I had decided to say when I was sitting in the parking garage 2 months ago, the thing I wrote in my notes app and read back to myself 4 or 5 times. I said, "Grandma Cecile said she wanted someone to know the price. Now everyone does." I picked up the folder. I said goodbye to my cousin B. I said goodbye to my Aunt Renata, who stood up and hugged me for a long moment and did not let go until she was ready. I did not say goodbye to my father. I drove home in the early evening light and I called David from the car and said, "I'm on my way," and he said, "I'll put the kettle on." There are practical things to state cleanly, so I will state them. The promissory note had a balance of $60,000 and accrued simple interest over 7 years at 3%, which brought the total owed to approximately $72,600. My attorney sent a formal demand letter. My father retained an attorney, the first time in his life I suspect that he had cause to. After 3 months of negotiation, we settled at $55,000. He liquidated a portion of a retirement account he had not disclosed to anyone in the family, not to me, not to Lorraine publicly, not to the system of assumptions he had been running. He sent a wire transfer. Mr. Osei filed the satisfaction of note with the county clerk. I received confirmation on a Thursday morning. I noted the time, 9:17 a.m. My Aunt Renata and I have dinner every few weeks now. She is the kind of woman who has always known the truth about her brother, and has spent decades not knowing what to do with that knowledge. She told me at one of these dinners that she had asked my father why he didn't go to the wedding. She told me what he said, which I will not repeat here, because it does not deserve the additional air. Lorraine sent me a card. It was a generic sympathy card, the kind with a dove on the front. Inside it said, "I'm sorry for your loss," which I can only assume referred to my grandmother and not to whatever version of a father I had been carrying. I put it in a drawer. I have not written back. My cousin B came to dinner at our apartment in June. She brought wine. She told David that he had kind eyes. He laughed, that laugh, the one that starts in his chest and reorganizes the room. And she said, "I'm serious," and he said, "I know, I'm just happy." She stayed until midnight, and when she left she hugged me in the doorway for a long time, and I thought about how love inside a family is not evenly distributed, and how sometimes you have to seek out the people who have been holding their portion quietly, waiting for you to find them. My grandmother's house sold 6 months ago. The yellow kitchen is someone else's now, and I hope they use it the way she did, with the window open and music on and enough tomatoes to give away. With the proceeds, David and I set up a small scholarship at the high school where he teaches. It goes to a senior who demonstrates what the application calls moral courage in the face of social pressure. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl who had stood up in a school assembly and said something true that no one wanted to hear. I did not name the scholarship after myself. I named it after Cecile. Her letter is in a document sleeve in the folder that lives on the top shelf of my office closet, next to the trust and the note and the photograph. I do not look at it often. I do not need to. I remember the line exactly. It is the kind of sentence that does not leave you once it has entered you. What happened in this story was not revenge. Revenge is when you take more than you were owed. What I did was simply stop absorbing a debt that had been placed on me without my consent, a debt that had been handed down through silence, through the assumption that my love for my family was unconditional credit they could draw on without limit, without a note, without a maturity date. My grandmother knew the price. She kept the record. She just waited until she could make sure it landed in hands that would know what to do with it. If this story reminded you that some people confuse your silence with your signature, and that silence is not the same thing as a signed document, take that as your sign. Look at what you've been absorbing. Name it. If you can, write it down. Some ledgers don't get corrected on their own. They get corrected because someone finally reads them all the way through. Drop a comment if Grandma Cecile's line landed the way it landed for me. Subscribe if you believe that quiet people keep the receipts. And I'll see you in the next one.